Prayer? Sometimes I pray.
We pray every night at dinner.
Yeah. Probably sitting like in a group of people and like praying together.
In the morning, you gotta get up, gotta be grateful for the day. You pray, you get ready for the day. Same thing at night.
You just pray. That's what we do.
The year was 1998. I was in 4th grade, and the time of year was the Christmas holiday season, and my family and I were at Sam's Club, which is like BJ's, which is like Costco. Anyway, getting groceries because my brother and I were ravenous animals, and a simple grocery store wouldn't do. And while we were walking through every single aisle, I came across a CD of a Christmas album from my favorite boy pop band at the time. Now, this one is for my millennials. The rest of you normal people, you have my permission to roll your eyes. Not that you needed it. There were only 2 boy pop bands I could have possibly been obsessed with in the 90s. Which one do you think it was? If you caught this week's teaser, then you may already know the answer, but do I strike you as more of a Backstreet Boys girl or an NSYNC girl? Because as hardcore fans will tell you, you can only love one. I'm happy to report that the Christmas album was from NSYNC, of course. Acts 15:9 tells me not to make it difficult for those of you who are turning to God. So if you're exploring faith and God at Grace Chapel today and you are a millennial who love the Backstreet Boys, you're technically welcome here. No, really, I want it that way. It would tear up my heart not to have you here. Seriously, no strings attached. God just might need to spend a little more time on you. Okay. Anyway, so I bring the CD to my mom and I ask her if I can have it. She knows I'm obsessed. I literally have binders, plural, labeled obsessions. I was already a very organized kid. And at least one of those binders was entirely dedicated to NSYNC. And yet she said no. I was crushed. I pushed a little bit, but she stood firm, and I knew that no that she dealt me wasn't one of those wishy-washy no's, so I backed down. Weirdly, and I can't remember why because it's not my MO, I just took it really well, and I guess I let it go. We continued shopping, and I just kept thinking about how we come to Sam's every week, so I'll just ask for it again next week. Well, we're standing in the checkout line, and I can see my mom and dad chatting quietly. And eventually my mom leans over to me and says, thank you for how you handled me saying no to that CD. You took it really well. Do you know where it is in the store? Do I still know? I mean, is it still seared in my memory for all eternity? Yeah. She says, go get it. You can have it, but be back quick. I was back with the CD before she finished that third sentence. It is 27 years later, and I still listen to that CD every single Christmas. Now, what kind of lesson do you think that I took away from this turn of events? Was it that my mom was this gracious, kind, generous, loving mom, and she had compassion and just wanted me to be happy? No. Don't be silly. I'm in 4th grade. My takeaway was that I had just cracked the code. I found out what I needed to do to get what I wanted. I just needed to be really chill. I just needed to take it really well and show some maturity or something that looked a lot like maturity. And then they would see what an amazing child I was and just give me what I wanted. I had unlocked my future, and it was bright. And horrifically naive, because the next time I leveraged that method, my mom still said no. And then the next time I found out that she actually already did the thing, and I didn't even have to bother asking. And then the next time she said no, I quickly realized I hadn't cracked the code, and my mom was an enigma. Nothing made sense except that throughout every such interaction, she was still my mom. And she still loved me. And her response in every circumstance, even though it resulted in different outcomes, was an expression of that love. I tried to act on what I thought I knew of her, what I wanted her to be like, what I remembered her doing the last time these circumstances presented themselves. And I missed her. I missed our relationship. I missed the point. Is our faith, are these practices, these spiritual practices that we do, shaped by our memory of what God has done, is capable of doing, or has done in other people's lives, rather than on God himself? And if it is, which I'm sorry, I think it's just true for all of us at some level in our lives, what do we do about it? As it turns out, behind all of these spiritual practices, behind stopping and taking a Sabbath and behind fasting, underneath all of that, there is a foundational practice which all of the rest are built, and that's prayer. Now, if you're anything like me, cue eye roll. Yeah, I know, I gotta pray. And I have to be honest, for me growing up, and even for me in seasons of my life as a pastor, prayer hardly felt like it was the thing that was going to crack the code. I wanted it to be, and it wasn't, because it resulted in different outcomes. And when I got what I wanted, prayer worked. I did it. And when I didn't get what I asked for, did I do something wrong? And maybe prayer isn't all that effective after all. And maybe that's a point of frustration for you as well, even if you maybe have a higher understanding of prayer. Maybe not all the time, but maybe there are seasons in your life where you're down on your knees and it doesn't seem to make a difference. Or you know you should be down on your knees, but you don't think it's going to make a difference, and so you move on and you just try harder at something else. Or you focus on other spiritual practices as a kind of act of prayer. Isn't it enough that I'm serving, that I'm fasting, that I'm Sabbathing without prayer? Shouldn't that matter? It's hard because so often, especially if you're not the type of person who prays often or easily, when people do pray, it's usually at a really tough point in their life. It may be when they're intervening on behalf of a family member or a child or the life of another, their future, someone or something that you love very deeply. You might not pray often, but when you do, the stakes feel very high. And if the outcome feels chaotic, like it could be anything, then you really want prayer to be the thing that cracks the code. And it was just never as hands-on and tangibly effective as I wanted it to be, as I had seen it or heard about it being for other people, or as I had seen it be in other times in my life, or as I read about it being in the Bible. But what if it was never meant to crack the code? If fourth grade me was a 12 to 30 some odd year old ancient Jewish man who was one of a dozen men who followed Jesus very closely thousands of years ago, I would probably find myself in Mark 9 being very frustrated with a very enigmatic Jesus. So let's jump in to Mark chapter 9 and watch full grown men fail like a fourth grade girl. First, context. Jesus is up on a mountain with some of his disciples talking to a couple dead people. Don't tell me that the Bible's not interesting. As they return, they notice that there is a crowd gathered around the rest of the disciples. They are arguing with scribes who were like Jewish law keepers. They're supposed to be a prime example of spiritual achievement at the time. In verse 15 through 18, we read this. When the crowd saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with awe, and they ran to greet him. What is all this arguing about? Jesus asked. One of the men in the crowd spoke up and said, "Teacher, I brought my son so that you could heal him. He's possessed by an evil spirit that won't let him talk. And whenever the spirit seizes him, it throws him violently to the ground. And then he foams at the mouth and he grinds his teeth and he becomes rigid. So I asked your disciples to cast out the evil spirit, but they couldn't do it." The scribes are apparently arguing with the disciples because the disciples claim to follow Jesus, but can't exorcise this demon from this boy. And Jesus performed many exorcisms and had actually given the 12 authority to expel demons in Galilee not too long ago in Mark chapter 6. But when the scribes witnessed the disciples' unsuccessful attempts at exorcising a demon from a boy, they apparently see their chance to assert their authority and to draw the disciples back into their legalistic fold. It's likely that the scribes are insisting that the disciples cannot save the boy because they are not empowered by God. But if they do exorcise a demon, that means the demon is listening to their master. So it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. Side note, the scribes who do claim to follow God don't appear to even care about the boy. But the frustrating thing for everyone is that the disciples have expelled demons before, and yet they can't seem to do it right now. In fact, they were so successful in Mark chapter 6 that they had earned the attention of a crowd of 5,000 that followed them to a desolate place outside of Bethesda. Now, however, stuck between a desperate father and cynical scribes, they find themselves unable to help. They know they've done this before. They know they can do it again. They know it's because of the power of God that it's possible. So what's the problem? They know God can. They know God has. They know God's involved them. Let's go to verse 19. Jesus said to them, "You faithless people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." Whoa, faithless? Okay, the scribes, yes. But the disciples? Jesus, this isn't our fault. You know we have faith. We've done this before. I have to imagine Peter, Jesus' main man, leaning over quietly and being like, "Hey, Jesus, you mean them, right?" They had done this before. They wanted to do it again. What was faithless about that? Maybe the signal was weak. Jesus was on a mountain too far away. Verse 20 to 24. So they brought the boy, but when the evil spirit saw Jesus, it threw the child into a violent convulsion, and he fell to the ground, writhing and foaming at the mouth. "How long has this been happening?" Jesus asked the boy's father. And he replied, "Since he was a little boy. The spirit often throws him into the fire or into water, trying to kill him. Have mercy on us and help us if you can." If you have a child who's ever suffered, let alone suffered for many years, within death's grasp, and you've been able to do, and you haven't been able to do anything about it, then you can understand this father's weariness, his desperation, and frustration with the bickering of religious people, but also the "if you can." Yet Jesus responds, "What do you mean if I can?" Jesus asked. "Anything is possible if a person believes." If he believes. That sounds like a trope from an animated children's film, but then also, so the disciples didn't believe? But how is that possible? God had done this before. The Father doesn't believe. He came looking for you. He heard that the disciples and you had done this before. The Father instantly cried out, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. First off, with God, you can always be confident and still be growing in confidence. Secondly, this father's response is key. It's the key difference in this whole situation. I do believe. That's faith. The disciples believed. They had faith. Help me in my unbelief. That's prayer. That's dependence. The disciples believed. The Father believed, but only the Father admitted dependence. In a display of beautiful vulnerability, the Father submits what faith he has alongside his doubt and fear. And this is really cool. I know pastors sometimes nerd out in the Greek and it's like whatever, but seriously, check this out. The word help is from the Greek root word boetheo, and it means either to bring aid to, so literally help me, or bring comfort. What a difference. Either help me, shape me, fix me, grow me, or if you're unwilling to do that, to solve it, then bring me comfort. I trust that you can fix it, and I trust that if you choose not to, that you will bring me comfort so that I can be strong for my son. That's what this father just said. This is complete and utter dependence on Jesus. And what parent, if they couldn't fix the problem or protect their child from it, wouldn't do everything to bring their child comfort in the midst of it? Jesus does, in fact, cast out the demon. But our question remains, why couldn't the disciples do it? We've already kind of touched on it, but let's look at verse 28 to 29 because it gives us the answer. Afterward, when Jesus was alone in the house with his disciples, they asked him, why couldn't we cast out the evil spirit? Jesus replied, this kind can only be cast out by prayer. The disciples tried to cast out the demon without Jesus and without prayer. This isn't laziness or ignorance on their part. This is just well-intentioned, experience-based self-confidence parading as faith. It's an assumption. The disciples assumed that God would act the same way that he had in the past. The disciples assumed that God would show up automatically. The disciples assumed that God's power was something that they now carried, not something that they continually received. The future was bright. But prayer exposes this lie to them and to us, that God's power is not something that we graduate into and then we just have it. It's something that we depend on every single time. Prayer is active dependence on God. Many wonder why we should pray at all if God already knows everything we need. That's a selfish view of prayer, as if it's only to compel God to give us what we want. Prayer doesn't seem to be the thing that cracks the code in that way. Not necessarily, but clearly nor does a better technique or stronger faith. They have that. But rather, it's this complete and utter dependence on God. It's not in order to break the code to get what we want, but prayer is active, real-time dependence and trust in God, in his character, in his nature. The disciples' problem isn't that they believed God could act. They did believe. It's that they rooted their trust and belief in what God had done instead of who God was and what he was doing right now. That's why prayer is foundational to all of the spiritual practices, of everything. Without prayer, hear this, without prayer, every spiritual discipline becomes self-reliance dressed up as faith. Without prayer, every single spiritual discipline becomes self-reliance dressed up as faith. Without prayer, Sabbath, fasting, healing, reading the Bible, going to a Bible study, whatever the spiritual practice is, it becomes self-reliance dressed up as faith. And no one demonstrates this quite so well as the disciples. Which brings us to Matthew chapter 26, 31 to 33, 36 to 46, which I'm just going to summarize. It's the end of Jesus' life and ministry. Jesus has just informed his disciples that they will desert him when he faces death. And Peter, with seemingly profound great faith, belief, and love, declares, even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you. Which kind of feels like he's throwing the other disciples under the cart. But shortly after, knowing what's coming, Jesus wants to go somewhere quiet so he can pray. He also wants the company of a few of his disciples because he knows what he's about to face. And while he is God, he is also human. He seeks comfort, first from God and second from his friends. So he goes to a little quiet olive grove called Gethsemane, and he asks his friends to sit and pray while he goes and prays. And the Bible tells us that he is anguished and distressed. Remember, fully God and fully human. He actually tells his disciples that his soul is crushed with grief to the point of death, and he just wants them to be with him. So he goes and he prays to the Father, actively putting his trust and dependence on the Father. But when he goes back to see the disciples, he finds them asleep, and he asks them with what I can only imagine is a broken heart rather than a scolding one, couldn't you watch with me even for 1 hour? So he asks them again to keep watch and pray while he goes for the second time to pray. But when he returns to his friends for the second time, he finds them asleep again. they couldn't keep their eyes open. Perhaps with some disappointment, but also some resignation, because remember, even Jesus knew that they would desert him, but maybe not quite so immediately. He goes back to pray to God for a third time in not too dissimilar a sentiment to the boy's father from Mark 9, saying, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away from me unless I drink it, may your will be done." This time when he returns to the disciples, asleep again, he just tells them to keep sleeping, almost facetiously, but then quickly tells them to get up because the soldiers have arrived after they had been retrieved by Jesus' betrayer, Judas. Peter's confidence earlier sounded really spiritual, but it was actually very dangerous. He assumed Jesus would avoid suffering. He assumed God's plan would align with his expectations of the Messiah. He assumed that God's power meant escape, not obedience, and he was going to help. They've seen miracles, so surely God wouldn't let this happen to his son. That's why their confidence isn't faith. That's why their confidence is dangerous. It's self-reliance. It's presumptuous. It's self-reliance dressed up as faith. Jesus prays, the disciples sleep. The contrast matters. Jesus prays honestly, he submits fully, and he entrusts himself to the Father's will. Meanwhile, the disciples avoid prayer, rely on their resolve, and collapse under pressure. Prayer wouldn't have changed the outcome, because surely they would have prayed for Jesus' protection. But it does change who is able to endure the outcome. In Mark 9, we saw the disciples fail publicly. And in Matthew 26, we see them fail personally. And it's the same root issue. They depend on what they believe God should do, not on God himself. In both moments, they assume God is making a mistake. They assume obedience should feel victorious. They assume faith means control. And prayer dismantles all of that. Prayer is active dependence on who God is, even when the outcome isn't what you want or think it should be. When I was in 4th grade, standing in Sam's Club, clutching the best NSYNC Christmas album of all time, I thought I had figured my mom out. Be chill, act mature, say the right thing, get the result. I thought I cracked the code. And in so doing, my goal was the outcome, not the relationship. And for years, if I'm honest, I treated prayer the same way. And sometimes I think I still do. If I pray the right way, if I have enough faith, if I say it without doubting, if I Sabbath, if I fast, if I behave, maybe I will get the outcome I'm looking for. Maybe I can crack the code. And when that doesn't work, when the outcome doesn't change, when the healing maybe doesn't come, when the door doesn't open, or when the suffering doesn't seem to lift, we can either assume we did it wrong, or we quietly step back and decide prayer it just isn't the thing that's going to move the needle. It's not the thing that cracks the code, and so we must become more spiritual in some other, more effective ways other than prayer, because prayer doesn't really do anything. Or maybe we just walk away from everything entirely. But Mark 9 and Matthew 26, Jesus gently exposes the lie. Prayer was never meant to crack the code. It was never meant to control the outcome, and it was never meant to guarantee the miracle. Prayer is active dependence on who God is. The father of the possessed boy, the desperate, trembling, imperfect father, becomes our example alongside our teacher, Jesus. I do believe. Help me in my unbelief. And my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away, unless I drink it, may your will be done. That's prayer. Maybe it's not certain. Maybe it's not strategic. That father understood in that moment that complete dependence on God is believing that God can, and that if he won't, he will be our source of comfort so that we can endure the outcome that we didn't want. And Jesus understood the same thing. And maybe that's why we resist it. Maybe that's why I resist it. It feels ineffective, and it is. It is ineffective if my goal is the outcome that I decide. We've prayed before and nothing's changed. Maybe the stakes feel too high. If I really bring this to God and it still doesn't change, what then? Some of us resist prayer because we don't know how to pray. We think that there's a right formula and we're afraid of getting it wrong, saying something silly. And some of us resist prayer because if we're honest, we prefer control, even if it's just the illusion of it, which is all we ever really have anyway. And prayer dismantles all of that. It dismantles the illusion that we can manage outcomes. It dismantles the fear that we have to perform for God. It dismantles the notion that prayer is something other than or more spiritual than talking to God. It dismantles the idea that faith means certainty. Instead, prayer anchors us, not in results, but in a relationship to an unchanging, loving, good God. Without prayer, we are at the mercy of our circumstances. Our faith and even character often rises and falls on the outcomes, with outcomes. But with prayer, our identity is anchored in a relationship with an unchanging good God, not results. Prayer is active dependence on who God is. So now what? What can we do with this before we all say bye? Bye, bye. God is not a vending machine, so stop trying to crack the code. He's not an algorithm. He's not a pattern to be mastered. He is a father, and he is a good father. The disciples believed in God's power, but prayer would have taught them to trust his will. And our job in prayer is not to predict or dictate his behavior. It's to depend on his character and nature. Prayer is not proof that God can do something. It's the confession that we cannot. Prayer is active dependence on who God is. Second, in prayer, bring both your belief and unbelief. You don't have to clean up your doubt before you come. You don't have to inflate your confidence. You don't have to pretend. You can simply say, I do believe. Help me in my unbelief. That prayer still works. You can trust God with confidence and still be growing in trust and confidence. You can be confident and still need comfort. Lastly, pray. The disciples in Mark 9 didn't pray and they failed publicly. The disciples in Gethsemane didn't pray and they collapsed personally. Jesus prayed and he endured. Prayer may not change the outcome, but it will shape who you are in the outcome. It forms endurance, it forms surrender, it forms trust and a relationship. And maybe that's the deeper miracle, because here's the truth I wish fourth grade me understood. My mom's yes wasn't about my behavior all the time. And her no wasn't about my failure all the time. Every answer flowed from who she was and her boundless love for me. And every answer from God, yes, no, wait, not yet, are you kidding, flows from who he is and his boundless, unbreakable love for you. And prayer doesn't make God more faithful. It makes us more dependent. And in a world where outcomes feel chaotic and stakes feel high and control feels fragile, dependence on a good and unchanging God is not weakness. It is foundational. So this week, don't aim for eloquence. Don't aim to be impressive. Don't aim for certainty. Aim for dependence. Maybe your prayer is as simple as, God, I trust you. Help me trust you more. It may not crack the code, but it will transform you and your relationship with God. Father, everybody comes from a different perspective, a different experience, a different set of thoughts about prayer. It can be really hard. It can be really confusing. It can be really overwhelming. It can feel so ineffective, and yet we know that we need it. And so then we feel guilty or ashamed or pressure or overwhelmed. And that's a shame, because prayer is so simple and it is so effective. Maybe not effective to achieve our goals or certain outcomes, but it is more than effective at shaping us, at building us up, at building our relationship with you. God, I pray that as we wrestle with and explore prayer, maybe for the first time, or maybe for the first time after a long time of praying, as we kind of re-explore it. God, I pray that wherever we're coming from, as we look to prayer, I pray that you would inspire us, that you would remove all shame, all desire for control, and that prayer would become this insatiable thing that we just had to participate in, that we just wanted to be in conversation with you all the time, that it would transform us from the inside out and to shape us more into who you are and who you designed us to be. I pray that prayer, the thought of talking to you would excite us and inspire us. Thank you for being a God who promises to meet us in that place. In Jesus' name, amen.